Okay, hi everyone. It's been a while. So I'm SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, in case you forgot who I am, because it's been several months now. But we're going to continue the opening survey section that I've started back in the summer. Okay, it's October now. I know it's been a couple months, but law school has a habit of taking all of your time. Fortunately now it's reading week, and I'm fully caught up with my readings. I'm actually ahead a little bit, so I essentially have a week off. So let's use that productively. Let's do some chess. So today we're going to look at very briefly um, the very popular online, at least, ideas where Black plays Bishop B6 and B6 and Bishop B7, which is usually known as the Owens defense when it has a name. And this is normally used by players who don't want to get stuck with a lot of theory, with the Sicilian or the French or the other openings. They just want a simple game where they can follow a couple of simple plans. And this is really it. It's not quite the equivalent, the Black equivalent of the London system, but it's pretty close. Black is going to have a very thematic set of development. He's going to do the same moves generally a lot, and he tends to do the same middle game plans. It'd be interesting, actually, to compare this with the mirror image, which is the modern. I did a video on this, I guess it's a couple months ago now, but it was relatively close in the series. And here, one of the main things that I emphasize is the incredible flexibility that Blacks has in this position. There's many different plans, and things often become unique very, very quickly. Again, there's ideas of playing d6, maybe c5, or maybe it's c6, maybe it's e5, e6, d. In fact, just about any of the pawns can go just about anywhere. It's even possible to eventually play some h5, h4 in certain variations to bring the rook here, and then it could slide around, or what have you. And that's not even counting where you can put the other pieces. And so there's this incredible flexibility built into the modern defense, which is interesting because if you look at, again, this is the exact mirror image, and it almost looks like it's a better mirror image because this bishop is attacking undefended pawn, and it's also attacking the general king side where white will like the castle. Yet, for all of that, this opening largely does not have the same flexibility. Black tends to tends to go down the very well-trodden path. Games tend to be very similar in my experience, and this is really because, especially after what I'm going to share with you. Now, in this position, it's perfectly possible for white to play knight c3. It's a good move. Maybe it's even the best move. I don't know. But this does help justify Black's play. For instance, after just look at a couple natural moves, let's say bishop b4 here. And what's going to happen? Well, we can see the bishop is pinning the knight, which means the e4 pawn is temporarily undefended. Black is already attacking it with the bishop, and he's going to play in some combination d5, knight f6, and keep pressuring e4. And that's what his play is going to be based on. Now, he's probably going to have to trade bishop for knight, and so white's going to get the two-bishop advantage. But Black has less space, and he's fine with trading pieces. And so Black has a fine position. Okay, if anyone's better, it's white, right? But it's not like white has this huge advantage. It's a game. But importantly, Black, he has that plan of interacting with e4. Compare that with bishop d3 instead. And then, no matter generally what Black does, we then follow up with queen e2. Let me get rid of those arrows. And the idea is to simply overprotect e4 before we put any of the knights anywhere. Because, for instance, if he now tries to play this bishop b4 idea, well, we can play c3, kick the bishop back, and then play knight to d2. And we have a simple, harmonious position. Our center is fully protected. So Black, he's trying to play in this hyper-modern spirit. He's trying to use his pieces to come at us, right? This bishop, and he's pinning, and he's hoping none of that has happened. We simply have a very strong center. And also, Black wasn't able to exchange this piece, and so he has more pieces. He's going to be feeling that cramping effect of a lack of space for quite a long time to come. And so by doing this, we leave the option of potentially playing c3 and knight to d2. Or if Black does absolutely nothing, maybe we can play c4 and try and get d5 in. Because if we can successfully play d5, then that would blunt that bishop. The bishop would just be terrible. And that bishop is, Black is kind of hoping it's going to be perhaps its best piece. And so that's an option. And it's the same thing over here. We're probably going to play knight f3, almost certainly. It's not going to h3, it can't go to e2. But by waiting, we give us the opportunity of maybe playing f4. which is somewhat risky, but it can be extremely effective. Now, I hesitate to say this because so many blitz players play this as black. Very often, they just wheel out their moves without even looking at what white is doing. And so that gives you this opportunity to play a somewhat risky plan, which can be very effective, which is one that I've used. And so in this position, I either now so black will play usually knight f6. So in this position, I would either play, in some combination, knight to d2 or f4. Let's look at f4. And the idea behind f4 is, again, if black continues with d5, in this position, black really only has two good moves. He needs to hit back with either d5 or c5. Those are his only two good pawn breaks. If black does not play one or both of these moves, then he simply has less space, no control of the center, and white is dominating. Like this would be a pretty crappy opening if black weren't able to play one of these two moves. In practice, I've seen this the most with d5. But then after e6, the knight moves back. We can see this is kind of like a French defense. In fact, this is very similar to a French defense, but it's a much better version for white. Why? Because there's no black counterplay on d4 yet. Black has nothing, no pressure against our center. And we already have the f-pawn here. Also notice that black has spent several tempi moving his French bishop to a pretty crappy square. It's no better than the original square. It's still staring at a black pawn. And so, not very good. And then after knight f3, we can just see that the middle game plan is super simple for white. We're going to play f5 at some point. We're either going to attack the king, yay, that's great, or we're going to exchange on e6, and then black is left with the weak pawn there, and then we can imagine, attacking, not like that, attacking it like that, there we go, imagine the queen comes over, you know how the arrows work, and just bring everything to attack this general area. And white has an extremely easy game in here. Almost to the point where I would almost think that d5 is a mistake, or if black does play d5, he needs to play along the lines of this knight e4. But then we're going to play knight f3, just stopping any queen h4 ideas, because notice how there's, some potential danger here. So we play knight f3, we're going to play knight d2, we kick his knight away, everything is fine. And white has a pretty stable advantage at this point. The problem is that black doesn't have to play d5 right away. He could play c5. And I didn't even realize this was a problem until literally about 10 minutes ago, right before I made this video. I just double-checked with Stockfish, making sure everything was okay, and then things aren't okay. Or at least they're not okay the way I want them to be. What I want to do is I want to play c3, so that way I could meet d5 with e5, and then go knight d7, and then we've got that French defense position again. White's doing great. The problem is that after, if we back up, here we go. If we play c3, the correct move would be actually to take the pawn, and then to play knight c6. That pawn is undefended, and if we defend it with knight f3, knight b4, and look at these arrows. All right, so e4 is attacked twice. It's defended twice. But one of our defenders is being attacked by the attacker. And worse, it's our good bishop. If black is able to exchange that bishop, then this bishop just becomes that much more powerful. And you can imagine after something like e5, okay, take, yeah, we want that, take, let's bring the knight. Even the knight can come here or here. Let's just bring the knight here. I like that. And so, bishop, beautiful. Knight, beautiful. It's pressuring all these squares. Cannot be kicked back. This bishop threatening to come to b4. Beautiful. Black is doing extremely well in this position. To the point where, again, it's Stockfish thinks it's almost half a pawn better for black. Holy cow. So I don't want to scare you away from this f4. It's not as if f4 is a bad move. It's just that this c3 is because that's too many pawn moves. Here it is, it's move 6, and white has 4 pawn moves. And black is able to counterattack very quickly. And so here, you would need to either, taking the pawn probably isn't very good. Playing e5, I don't know. So you're probably left with either playing knight f3, and then after take, we kind of have a Sicilian pawn structure of some sort, So I don't know if this is better or worse. The computer thinks it's equal, but now all of a sudden it's Sicilian. Maybe that's okay, because black was playing b6. He probably doesn't want to play a lot of theory. Now it's a Sicilian. Okay, there isn't really any theory in this position, but a Sicilian is much more of a mainline opening. But maybe you didn't want to play an open Sicilian, so it goes both ways. More interesting is to play with d5. But then, a black can play with g6, which looks absolutely crazy. But this position is starting to look like what's known as Benoni, which is a position, an opening we'll get to later in the survey. And it's pretty crazy. And it's already we're into some unique territory. And what's going to happen is, like, this bishop's going to come here, and it's got an absolutely fantastic diagonal. This bishop is either going to pressure a pawn here, or after an eventual exchange, d6, here, the bishop's going to come alive this way, or the bishop is help supporting pawn breaks over here. It's a strange game. It's hard for me to give general advice here. And again, when I eventually do the Benoni, we'll go into detail with some of these plans here. But it's gonna be an interesting game, a wild game. Not the safe, easy French defense advantage that I was hoping for when I originally played it. And so if you like those types of positions, either the open Sicilian, the strange pseudo Benoni, or the safe French defense, then this f4 is a really good idea. Then you're absolutely fine. I've tried to also look at it with knight to d2, because if black plays d5, then it's going to be the exact same thing, right? You got the f4, the exact same plans, everything is great. If he plays with c5, we might be able to get away with c3 now, because after take, knight to d2, knight f3, knight b4, we can now push the bishop back to b1 and kick the knight away with a3. Everything's protected. We don't lose our bishop. But after bishop a6, the knight's protected. Our queen has to move. That's not very good. And also the knight's in front of the f-pawn, so we don't get our safe advantage after f4. So maybe this doesn't work. Or again, after after knight to d2, c5, we can't get away with c3. We might have to do something else. Now, if that looks absolutely too wild for you, and again, this is kind of a sideline opening, not one you want to do a lot of preparation for, then you can just play simply with knight f3. You're going to castle. You have the choice of playing knight c3 with c3 or c4 or knight to d2. You can just see what happens. And you've got, again, a very simple, safe position where all you're trying to do is overprotect the center, and then sooner or later, you'll finish developing, and then you'll push one of these pawns. This is great. It's safe. It's going to be a pretty even game, which is fine, which is great. It doesn't punish the automatic black player the way the f4 does, but it leads to a very safe, comfortable game as well. And so those are kind of the two options. Again, I only just found out about this whole c5 thing. And so I'm going to see if I can look into maybe some theory, maybe make my f4 move work, and to get, a not crazy position. But the initial results weren't promising. But there we go. So we got two plans: early f4 or not, and just play very sensibly, expanding in the center, either slowly or quickly, and just trying to not exchange pieces. There you go. Now, before we go, I also want to quickly look at the Hippo. So give me 1 second while I pull that up. Okay. So the Hippo, I honestly don't even know if there's an official Hippo move order. The Hippo is more of a, it's a setup. It's a system, if you will, kind of similar to the London system. And so it's generally this, where in some order, somehow, black is putting his bishops on the fianchetto, he's putting his knights in front of the king and queen. He's got all these pawns here. And you can see that these pawns do an excellent job of covering everything. And so the Hippo kind of sits there, and it's trying to frustrate white, and I hope that white's lashes out. And perhaps the main thing you need to realize about the Hippo, and certainly the main thing that black players do, is that whichever way you try and expand in the center, black will immediately do the opposite. For instance, in this position, if you were to play e5, black, he's going to play d5. He's, okay, in this position, he's hitting your bishop. Let's just move the bishop somewhere. I'll just move it here. And now, look what's going to happen. Now, he's got this c5 counterattack. Maybe he's going to push these pawns and expand the center. He also has the option of playing f6. Maybe, maybe not. But those are some pawn breaks. By contrast, if you ask yourself, what is white going to do? What are white's pawn breaks? And because the center is blocked in the position of his knights and bishops, he doesn't really have anything easy. It's very hard to get f4, f5 in. Maybe some oh frig, arrows, color. Maybe h4 and g4, but that weakens the king. So that leaves us with like some combination of a4 and b. There's not a heck of a lot. And the same thing is true if we were to do the opposite. Let me just move the bishop back here. So black, he can hit back with b5 and, b4, hitting our pieces. c6 may or may not work. Playing c6, getting some exchanges, it might let that bishop live, okay? But the main idea would be to eventually play f5, which is similar to the King's Indian in certain lines of the Perk, the Modern. And he's either threatening to play f4 and trap it, or he's just getting this pawn avalanche coming against the white king. And so black is getting play almost out of nowhere as a counterpunch to white's center expansion there. And that's really the essence of this Hippo strategy, is you're waiting for white to do something, and then you're counterattacking, you're counterpunching kind of on the opposite side, using his energy against him. And if I'm perfectly honest, this white structure, it looks absolutely perfect, right? The knights are on the best squares, the bishops are on the best squares, we've castled, we've got control of the center, we have our rooks on the center files, everything looks great. But it's actually really hard to figure out what to do from here. And it seems as if this is the exact setup the Hippo is trying to counterattack. Like, this is somehow like the best version of development, but the worst way of tackling the Hippo, if that makes sense. And so, now the main suggestion I have, and it's kind of similar to b6, straight b6, and sometimes you'll see people, they'll play this bishop b6, bishop b7, okay, you'll not move your king, you'll play bishop d3, right? And then they'll start doing this. And you're like, all right, now you can play knight c3 because there's no bishop b4, and then they do this. And now you realize they're going into a Hippo. And so again, it's so hard to figure out like when a Hippo starts or stops. It's this general structure they're getting. That's why I'm trying to put these two ideas in the same video. Anyway, so once my rule, this is my personal rule, is once I know my opponent, or I strongly suspect my opponent is going for a Hippo setup, like here. He's got his pawns here, he's fianchettoing here, he's very likely. I've played enough online chess. I know what my opponent wants to do. He's going to do a Hippo. So the general rule I have is you want to put 3 pawns in the center. If your opponent is not claiming any space, if your opponent is putting his pieces behind his pawns, because again, if we look at that Hippo structure, this is exactly what he's doing. He's putting his pieces behind your pawns. He's putting his pieces behind his pawns. That's what you want to do. You want to put your pawns, your pieces behind your pawns. Or, put that positively, you want your pawns to lead your pieces. And so, we're here. We get some f4 in. Boom. And so now what we're going to do is you can just imagine, okay, black does the exact same thing. But we can kind of see this difference here. I'll go a couple more moves. So black has the exact same structure. It's identical. But white, he's now behind his pawns, and he's ready to crush in. And look at a really important distinction. For one, if we were to play e5, d5, well, now we could continue with g4, and we're really ready. Imagine something like this. Everything is ready to hit this f5 coming right in. Black isn't able to castle queenside very, very soon. Our pieces are great. We have no real danger, and we can smash f5 very, very quickly. That's excellent. Woohoo! Alternatively, we could play with f5 immediately, almost as a pawn sacrifice, because you can just imagine take, It's not even a pawn sacrifice, just because we're completely opening the center up. He can't take. That doesn't work because of the pin on the e file, so that's not very good. And then finally, if we were to play with this d5, black can't really play e5 because our pawn's already here. And so that gives us the option of either exchanging or pushing right away. And again, we're trying to open lines somehow. And so by putting the pawns first, and then we're able to sort of play around the pawns, we're able to maximize the pawn break. Because again, if we go back to sort of like this structure, the hard part is that white doesn't have any natural pawn breaks, no way of increasing his piece's activity. Because again, every pawn attempt is just hit, it just gets hit right back, it doesn't work. In this position, right, all three pawn ideas work much better. And we're in a position to help, to make them better. And, you know, these ideas still work. Even maybe this idea still works. And so white is much more flexible. And the exact same thing works in reverse. So let's look at this. You know, instead of, we could play, you know, with knight f3. You know, he does something like this. Like this. We could try with c4. Okay, I'll just, you know, do some random things here. We'll say, right? And where it's very, very similar is where we can try and play with c5. We can try to play with, you know, all the pawn breaks are there, and black doesn't yet have this fast counterplay. And we have all the time in the world to sit there and prepare. This, I don't know what theory actually says about the Hippo, but in my experience, playing like this, with at least 3 pawns in the center, rather than just putting the pieces on their normal squares, makes it so much easier to fight against this. And that's kind of what you want, because again, this is very often, I don't know if people even play this over the board at tournaments, but it's fairly common, especially in Blitz, in Bullet. And when you're playing, you know, with 2 minutes on your clock, you don't have time to think of all the plans. You just need something to do it. And so get some pawns here, prepare when the pawn breaks, you've got it. Or like we do with the F pile, right? And I can't actually tell you how often that I've even just sacrificed a pawn. Oops. Boom. Like this. Where it's now opened the position up. Because now, all of a sudden, everything, you know, we can just imagine, is coming at black. He doesn't have that safe pawn, sorry. Look at this position. His pawns, like, they're a mess. There's so many good squares for white's pieces. Whereas, if we were to look, you know, back here. No, not there. Here. Yeah, how about here? Aha! We can see how his pawns are protecting absolutely everything. And so by getting an early pawn break, even if you're sacrificing a pawn, it gives you a lot more play. And black doesn't have that easy idea of just taking whatever you're doing and then doing the opposite. He can't do that. And so sometimes that's worth sacrificing a pawn. And again, if it's a blitz game, you know, it doesn't mean anything, it's online, go for it. You're much more likely to catch your opponent off guard and do well, in my experience. So there we go. That perhaps was too much time to invest in 2 systems that you're probably only ever going to see in online blitz. But if the only thing you play is online blitz, then maybe you'll see this a lot. Maybe it's useful. But again, it's those underlying ideas. And we can see how learning different openings, the ideas behind openings, can help. Because if we know how to counter the French, or some ideas to use against the French defense, then that'll help when we get French defense style pawn structures like we had in the b6, b7 line. It also tells us, you know, get pawns in the when your opponent doesn't take the center, let's throw some pawns there. That'll work no matter what opening or not opening our opponent is playing. Anyway, that's that. Questions, comments, love to hear it. I'm going to do several of these videos this week. If I'm really on the ball, I'll do one every day, but don't quote me on that. And so I'll try and complete the opening survey in the next little bit. No promises, but well, I'll do the best I can. So again, SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Questions, comments, you know, criticisms, you know, let me have it. You know, it's been a couple of months, so I'm probably rusty even at just talking. But that's it. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.